Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach. Life has offered every alternatives to me, but I won't waver. I'd rather hold on to every promise you made.
I'm sure you all like that music interlude. Again, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Redeemers Men's Fellowship Lagos Province 1 Convention 2020, the flagship province of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, under the leadership of Pastor Samuel Bode Olanio. My name again is Ayobami Olubi, and I've been given the mandate to lead the men in Lagos Province 1 Redeemers Men's Fellowship. Our mission is a Christ-oriented ministry for men, by men, who through the gospel of Jesus Christ emphasize the biblical importance of family, encourage personal growth, and through love, prayer, and fellowship. This morning, for the next 2 to 3 hours, we shall be encouraging webinar participants in 3 areas based on Redeemers Men's Fellowship mission as follows: having courage and conviction to navigate post-COVID-19 fallout, building and funding agro-business, and number 3, funding opportunities in agro-business in Nigeria. The following 3 truly distinguished gentlemen, led by our esteemed Assistant General Overseer of the Redeemed Christian Church of God, in charge of education and training, Pastor Ezekiel Odeyemi, will set us up this morning to new spiritual heights post-COVID-19, followed by 2 successful brothers in the corporate world, Babajide Aro Shafe, Executive Director, Technical Directorate, Nigeria Incentive-Based Risk Sharing System for Agriculture and Lending, NIFSAL PLC, and Wole Oshin, Head Agribusiness, Stanbic IBTC Bank. These 2 individuals, my brethren, are reforming agribusiness in Nigeria. So we are highly honored to have these 2 gentlemen in our webinar this morning. My beloved participants, please plug yourselves into every word of our esteemed speakers, because that will be a game changer in your life and in my life. There'll be a follow-up post-convention webinar for those that have indicated interest in following through in about a month's time, subject to confirmation and availability of brothers Aro Shafe and Oshin. Our technical team have dropped Google form in the chat room for your action if you want to follow through after this convention. We want to walk the talk and make a difference. Finally, I encourage you to be strong and courageous and be of good cheer, because there is a path to outstanding business opportunities in the midst of current challenges. I am convinced the challenges shall be stepping stones to the top. God bless you all.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Aro Shafe. It's been a very enlightening session. And in fact, all the other questions, just like if we had actually seen, have been in one way or the other answer. So the slide will be available. So we'll be able to get answers to some of the other questions we are asking if we look deeply into the slides. Thank you very much. So without wasting time, we'll go to the next session that will be taken by our next facilitator, Wole Oshin, Mr. Wole Oshin. And he has over 20 years banking experience with a focus on new business development and relationship management. His experience spans across corporate and investment banking, public sector, branch management, commercial banking, SME banking, and agribusiness finance. So many of us asking questions about finance, we'll be able to get some of the answers to our questions as we listen to the next session. He will be speaking to us on funding opportunities in agro business. So this morning, I invite Mr. Wole Oshin to make his presentation to us. You are welcome, sir. Over to you, sir.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Dr. Kayode. And good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me. I will just quickly share my screen now. Okay, please kindly let me know once you can see my screen, please. Is it
Yeah, good,
visible?
my brother. Yeah, good, Wole.
Okay, am I audible enough? Can you hear me
Yes,
clearly?
yes, please.
Okay,
Thank
thank you very much, and also thank you, Mr. Aro Shafe. He has actually done what I wanted to do as well, but we'll still go through the drill at the same time. And I'm happy to be here to be part of this session, and may God open our minds and crown all our efforts and take us to that level where we all hope to be in our individual pursuits. So my presentation will is in five parts, 4 parts, and the conclusion. I will talk through, take a look at the global overview of agriculture, and we'll come down to Nigeria to look at agriculture in Nigeria, and also seek to understand agriculture and the agribusiness value chain. Then we'll talk briefly about financing, and I will conclude. So globally, agriculture, globally, the agriculture utilizes an estimated 12% of the land in the world, which is approximately 1.6 billion hectares out of 13.2 billion hectares available land. And 2/3 of labor, labor force in developed countries, population work in agriculture. In developing countries work in agriculture, and less than 5% do in developed countries, which is a function of the level of technology and mechanization which is available in those countries. And based on population, it presents a huge opportunity, both locally in Nigeria, based on our population that is currently estimated at 200 million. And if we also go international, the world population is estimated by the World Bank to get to approximately 9.7 billion by the year 2015. Population estimate for the world currently is about 7.6, 7.8 billion. And in addition to that, agriculture is also a good contributor to countries' GDP, even though when we come to Africa, it's a major contributor to GDP in Africa. And Nigeria is an example where agriculture currently contributes approximately 25% to GDP. But we see a bit of a reverse in developed countries. Not that the value when you monetize it is low, it's actually quite huge, but because they have bigger GDPs, bigger economies than we have in Africa and in Nigeria. So the percentage appears to be small, but in real terms, it's actually quite high. Then coming to Nigeria, like I mentioned earlier, agriculture contributes approximately 25% to our GDP, which this is based on the Q2 2020 GDP figures that was recently announced by the National Bureau for Statistics. But if we also go back in history as well, we compare Q2 2020 with the same period in 2019, we can see that there's been a growth despite the retraction that our economy witnessed in the second half of this year by shrinking by about 6.1%, and consumer price inflation is high in Nigeria currently, is going up based on the current realities of the economy. However, for agriculture, it remains a strong sector. It keeps growing, and it's also gives the population of the country, also gives a very significant opportunity to the sector. Then in terms of what actually happens within that agricultural sector, agriculture mainly consists of crop production, livestock, forestry, and fishery. And the major contributor within that sector is crop production, which contributes about 89% approximate of the agriculture sector's contribution to the national GDP itself. And going further, I spoke earlier about the resilience of agriculture. And I mean, one of our speakers has equally highlighted that. At the last recession, which we witnessed in Nigeria between 2015 to 2017, out of the three major sectors, agriculture, industries, and services in Nigeria, agriculture was actually the only one that stayed above water. It didn't shrink at all. And we've also seen the same thing based on the recent NBS data that came out about a week ago, whereby we saw that in the first quarter of 2020, the sector grew by 1.58%, and further growth of 1.79% was, witnessed in the second quarter of this year. And if we look at the country, Nigeria has vast land, over, 30 million hectares of arable land, and just about 30% of that is what is being cultivated currently in the country. And our country, if we look across all the geopolitical zones, we have various, an array of agricultural produce which are predominant, which they have,
Hello, sir, Mr. Oshin. Can you help us increase your
Yes.
volume a bit?
Oh, okay.
People are having challenges hearing you very clearly.
Okay, is it better now?
A little bit more will do.
Okay, let me just improvise with my mic here.
Okay.
So that it will be closer to my mouth.
Thank you very much, sir. Sorry.
Okay, so not a problem. Is it better now?
I think it's better now, yes. Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the feedback. So if we look at the country, I said that across the country's geopolitical zones, we have various commodities which are predominantly grown in those areas, both local commodities and export commodities, as we can see on this slide. And I would also like to mention that linking all efforts and opportunities in the sector, the country, through the Central Bank of Nigeria, has also identified some key commodities, which are the term as focus commodities, to which attention is being given by way of developmental projects, supports, and intervention funds as well. If you look at the bottom right of this slide, some of these commodities are actually listed, and I've also shown the estimated production output which the country had as at the 2019 production season. Rice, for instance, I'll go to rice paddy again. We were better informed now about what rice paddy is. Rice doesn't come out of the farm in the form which we eat it in our various homes. As at 2019, the estimated production that came out of for that commodity was 6.8 million metric tons. And meanwhile, the local requirements for rice is actually almost double that, about 10 to 12 million metric tons, if not more, is what we require. The same thing for maize. As at last year, estimated production, according to available data, was just above 10 million metric tons. Meanwhile, local need is above 15 million metric tons. So maize is not just a what we require in our homes is a major component of animal feed production, for instance. You know, about 80 to 85%, depending on the model of animal feed producers, for instance, is required for animal feed, while the other, the balance, excluding feed additives and other mineral requirements, is soya beans. And so we have that gap in across all these sectors, and the central bank, through its developmental intervention funds, actually has made provision for both the backward integration and also which speaks to the production, that's the cultivation of these commodities, as well as the processing. But as we proceed, I will highlight a bit more on those. Then, if we look at Nigeria and we compare ourselves, not by way of competition, but just to benchmark what we're doing in Nigeria against what other the major countries, the major producers across the world are doing. If we go to rice, paddy rice, for instance, we can see that Nigeria produced at 2019 an average of 6.8 million metric tons at an average yield of 2 metric tons per hectare, compared to a China that produced an average of 212 million metric tons with an average yield of 7.03 metric tons per hectare. Now, the difference, as has been highlighted in the previous presentation, actually speaks to availability of technology, knowledge that is used, deployed to the production of these commodities, in addition to mechanization. The bulk of the production that we currently do in Nigeria, even though I must mention that things have changed. There are a lot of changes that have come into that sector, but about 70, majority of the crop production that we do is actually done by smallholder farmers. And part of the changes that we are now witnessing is that, they are being coordinated into groups. Cooperatives are being formed, and we also have the entrance, we're also witnessing the entrance of the agri-fintech companies that are equally aggregating all these farmers and linking them to markets, linking them to services, deploying technology to improve the level of production, which will ultimately enable us to begin to see some clear changes. And in addition to that, some of the policy changes which we're seeing, part of which is the ban on the importation of maize, for instance, will also drive and force increased production in that of that commodity. I just thought to show this to highlight the opportunities, what the other major producers across the world are doing, and link it to what can be done in Nigeria to tap into the huge population that we have that is a ready market. We're not even talking about exports now. And going forward, I just spoke about exports. The key export products, which are commodities that come out of Nigeria for now, is we have cashew, we have sesame seeds, and of course we have cocoa. And if we look at this slide, the top left corner shows the value of major export products as at Q4 2019 that went out of Nigeria. We will see somewhere here that's number 6 from the right, the highest ranking export products according to available data is sesame seeds, with a value of 27.78 billion naira. That was the value of exports that was recorded for that commodity as at that time. And we also have cocoa, which ranked next with a value of 24.6 billion naira. Then if we go to the bottom left corner of that of the screen, we will see that even though the figure, the export value for sesame seeds as at that period is high, but if we compare it in percentage terms with the total exports or with other export products, we'll see that sesame seeds only form 0.58% of the value of exports. Yes, we know that the major, about 80 to 90% of our export is currently oil. And in recent times, we know what has happened in the industry. And that's also the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown equally made it worse, to the point that average price of crude oil went as low as $12 per barrel at a time when our average cost of production of that same barrel of crude was an average of $27, according to available data at that time. And in terms of imports, the major agricultural imports is also wheat, which had a value of 66.6 billion naira, and in percentage terms, it's 1.25% of the total major trade that happened at that period. Then, in terms of the major traded agricultural produce, we'll still see that sesame seeds still rank highest with that same value of 27.7 billion naira. Though the major players in that area are, international global companies who aggregate sesame seeds, and the opportunities are still there. There are associations, they offtake mainly, they have their own grower backward integration structures, and at the same time, they still offtake or aggregate from the relevant associations or smallholder producer groups as well. And the opportunity still remains in that sector. And if we also still look at Nigeria, the agribusiness sector is largely affected by, purchasing power, a number of factors. Purchasing power is an important aspect there due to increasing inflation. Availability of local production, is also a major issue, which is linked to the high level of post-harvest losses which we have. Then supply and sourcing, and equally consumer habits, is also a key factor. The previous presentation we listened to highlighted the fact that there's a need to understand what the market wants, understand what the consumer needs, and be able to position yourselves, and differentiate your product offerings to meet those requirements. I remember at the height of the lockdown, I remember reading the story of a young man in, I think it was either Kenya or Zimbabwe, who took advantage of the lockdown in his local community. He was producing vegetables, and he quickly, created a new service, door-to-door delivery of groceries, in his community, and was able to leverage on the power of technology, social media, to get orders and deliver. And while a lot of businesses shut down at that time, while other people who were not able to quickly think on their feet and provide solutions, he was able to do that. And that speaks to a key requirement as well in going into agribusiness or any business at all, to look for gaps in the market, which we will now plug into and take advantage of the inherent opportunities. So going further, we will also look at understanding agriculture and the agribusiness value chain. These are two terms that have been used intermittently from time to time. But in simple terms, agriculture is a practice of farming, which includes crop production, cultivation, livestock, fishing, and aquaculture. While agribusiness speaks to the business of managing the produce from farm to fork, all speaks to all the various actors in the food chain. And if I quickly use rice as an example to buttress this point, somebody asked a question earlier that what is paddy rice? Paddy rice is, if I use that phrase, is the crude form of rice with a coating. Rice is not harvested in a form that you can eat it without undergoing certain levels of processing. Now, prior to when you are able to harvest rice, there are actors within that value chain, who are responsible for providing the seeds, the varieties of seeds that will have the capacity to give you high yield per hectare, right? And there are also other actors who provide the agrochemicals, the fertilizers that are used in the production, before we now get to those who do the actual planting of that rice, right? So if you take it down, from there, when the rice is harvested, there are people who produce and provide the bags into which the harvested rice is packaged for transportation to the mill. There are people who aggregate, who buy them off from the producers or the farmers and supply to the mills for milling. And there are, before it is now equally packaged. And there are other players or actors who position themselves as the distributors or marketers of this produce, while we also have those who position themselves for transportation and logistics. So before the rice comes from farm to fork, all the relevant stages, all the relevant operations that support the production of that rice, that's the cultivation of the rice, the processing, bagging, till the time you go into a ShopRite in Lagos or a game in Lagos to buy that rice in a bag and cook. That is, in a nutshell, is an agribusiness value chain. That is what it speaks to. And the value chain, agribusiness can be separated into 3 or 4 broad categories. I've done 4 here. First being pre-upstream, which overlaps with the upstream. Actually, upstream speaks to those who provide seeds, management and control, research. We have research institutions like IITAs of this world, FIROs of this world, who set standards, produce, continuously doing research into what kind of seeds or what kind of things we need to for effective disease control, quality controls. Then we have the upstream, which speaks to the actual cultivation or production of crops or rearing of livestock or fishery or forestry. Then we have the midstream, which speaks to the manufacturing, the processing. So that you can relate that with the rice processing company. You can relate that to the beverage companies. You can relate that to the cereal producing companies, the companies that produce cornflakes or golden morn and all those other cereals, that we're used to in the homes. And at the same time, it speaks to those who fabricate tools and distribution of things generally. Then we have the downstream, which speaks to logistics, shipping or exports or import of tools and equipment, and importation of or sales of the chemicals and fertilizers that are used. And in our climb, majority of the participants in the value chain, play in the upstream value chain as well. But we have a strong emergence of participants in the midstream as well. With the ban on importation of rice, quite a whole lot of cottage rice milling plants and even commercial large-scale rice milling plants have emerged. I remember sometime about a year or two ago, I paid a visit to a market in the grains market in Kano. It's called Dawano Market. It's actually one of the biggest markets, grains markets, if not the biggest in West Africa. And one of the interesting things I saw in that market when I visited was that we even, just like we have in Lagos, that when in our home we want to make stew, you can take your pepper to go and blend somewhere and come back to make your stew. There are actually cottage rice mills within that market where they have the mill, they have the rice paddy, and if as an individual, I want to go into rice distribution, I want to have my own brand of rice, I can go into those locations with my branded bag and they will package that rice for me. I found it interesting because it's an eye-opener to the fact that you can go into rice distribution or have your own brand of rice without necessarily owning your meal. So that is what the power that concepts like value chain and agribusiness actually brings. That's kind of opportunities it actually opens up. Just to check, am I still audible? Am I still clearly audible?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. And the other interesting aspect to what I've just described now is that even a regulator, that takes me to this slide, even a regulator like NAFDAC actually recognizes, and have categorized what I've just described as contract packaging, whereby anybody who is interested in doing that kind of venture can actually get his own NAFDAC number for that product. So you are not going to be doing it illegally in any way, So, so that takes me to the typical agriculture or agribusiness value chain. We've spoken about the input supplies. That's the starting point, like we mentioned earlier, that relates with fertilizers, that relates with agrochemicals. Those are, areas of opportunity. As of today, Nigeria, the demand for fertilizer still by far outstrips the supply for fertilizer. That's on one hand with both the private large corporate fertilizer manufacturing or importing companies, in addition to the federal government's fertilizer initiatives as well. The demand is very huge and is an opportunity area that, those who find that part of the value chain attractive can conduct further studies and look at how they can plug in themselves for business opportunities. The same thing with production. One of the reasons why we have a huge level of post-harvest loss in Nigeria is that, which is also attributed to insufficient knowledge or information, is that a lot of producers do what I will call speculative production. I remember sometime not too long ago, a tomato processing plant, opened in the somewhere in the northern part of Nigeria, and a lot of local farmers, went and started producing tomatoes. By the time they harvested and started to take to that company for possible supply, they realized that the variety of tomatoes that they had produced is not what that company wanted. The variety that the equipment in that company requires is a variety that has limited water content, but what they produce had a much higher water content. So that was an immediate problem. And what we typically find is that when farmers follow what is called the herd effect, they just hear that this is what everybody is cultivating. They move there, they suffer losses, then they move to something else. However, there are concepts like demand-led production, which we're seeing happening in the market now, that a lot of um, commercial farmers, a lot of aggregators, including the agri-fintech companies that I mentioned earlier, they actually initiate and plug into to the processing value chain, plug into an offtake, and that is what will now determine what they are going to produce. So from the point where they want to start a production, they already know where that produce is going to, by the time they harvest, and cassava is also one of it, I mean, we there was a mention of, huge requirement for industrial starch earlier. And I recall some data that I saw recently. The estimated local requirement for industrial starch in Nigeria today is about over 5 million metric tons. And you will have seen in an earlier slide where I showed the commodities predominant in Nigeria, the focus commodities. We produce about 55 or 58 million metric tons of cassava as at 2019. And the bulk of it is actually used to make garri. And we've also seen cases where farmers go and start producing cassava with the intention of supplying to cassava processing plants without knowing the right variety of cassava to be produced. Meanwhile, there are about over 40 varieties of cassava depending on what the purpose is. So that speaks again to information, speaks again to research, the need to thoroughly and properly understand what area you want to go into before venturing into it and investing and going through the necessary learning curve to avoid or minimize possible losses. So I've indirectly spoken about processing and marketing and trade. So across this value chain now, we have all the various regulators like Standards Organization of Nigeria, like the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, who provide policy frameworks and support for the sector. And of course, we have the financial institutions on the other hand, who provide access to finance. The Central Bank of Nigeria, the NASAL, who plays a big brother role by providing its guarantee instruments to de-risk lendings that are done by commercial banks. Then we have the Bank of Agriculture, Bank of Industry, and others, and of course commercial banks like Stanbic IBTC, who provide financing, that can support. And I've also over the last 10 years thereabouts, being a major participant in accessing intervention funds for its customers, both at the large corporate level and the medium and small scale levels as well. And it's going further again into opportunities in the value chain. I've practically spoken about this earlier. At the input aspect, there are opportunities for fertilizer distribution, other inputs, manufacturing and distribution, chemicals, and the likes. While I've spoken about demand-led production as well to avoid speculative production, and mechanization is equally an important aspect. I remember I think it was a World Bank report, which shows that Nigeria, the estimated number of tractors in operation in Nigeria today is about 35,000. And for us to say we want to be serious about mechanized agriculture, we require over 80,000 tractors to be in operation. That is a gap. And the interesting thing that has also emerged in the market, in the industry, is that as a farmer, you actually do not need to go and invest in buying your own tractors. In fact, if you have any farmland of 20 hectares or 30, and you are buying tractors, it's not an efficient deployment of resource, because there are tractor service companies. Even though what I've just said is a bit difficult in the southwest of the country compared with the north, because a lot of our farmlands are not contiguous. In the north, you can readily have access to 5, 10, 15,000 hectares of land in one location, and that also brings me to another interesting thing that is happening as well. There was a mention of African Development Bank earlier. The AFDB is bringing in about $500 million or so into Nigeria to establish what is called the special agro production and processing zones, right? About 13 or 14 of them. And what that means, in simple terms, is that they're bringing these funds into the country to set up identify investors who will now set up ecosystems or communities of crop production, where in that community you can have maybe 20, 30, 40,000 hectares of land. In that community, there will be availability of fertilizer, there will be crop producers, there will be storage facilities, which is also a key issue. We have inadequate storage facilities in Nigeria. There will be storage facilities, silos, for a commodity like beans, for instance, that is prone to weevil infestation. And where you have silos, temperature-controlled silos, it helps to keep that commodity at a temperature, regulated temperature, whereby pests like weevils will not be able to thrive. So, and you will even have processing facilities within that same ecosystem. And what will it do? It will make it easier. It will make production to be much more efficient, unlike a situation where you have a rice mill in one zone of the country, and you are having to transport rice paddy from a different zone in the country. And you also realize that it also makes it easier even for the finance institutions to say that, oh, this opportunity to fund that gap in mechanization equipment, tractors, for instance, it will make it easier to have a view, of all year round crop production within that ecosystem. You can even invest as a potential investor, you can even invest in irrigation facilities, because you know that within that ecosystem, there will be continuous production all year round. And the production output or the finished goods will now be taken out for distribution. Of course, we are all aware that there are challenges to faced in that sector, but within those challenges, like we've identified, there are opportunities as well, and a few of them, like rural location of farm sites, lack of adequate infrastructure. I can quickly relate to cassava production, for instance. If you produce cassava, you have within 2 to maximum 3 days to ensure that it goes into a processing facility. Otherwise, you begin to look at losses. There are communal challenges here and there. We've seen projects whereby issues with the community, just makes a project to be dead on arrival, and investors lose funds. But those things, education, information, are things that can always carefully mitigate and support challenges like that. Then I'll go to financing, just a brief highlight. There are various financing windows. There was, thanks to Mr. Rowe-Shafe for the detailed snapshots earlier. But the major ones come from the Central Bank of Nigeria, where you have single-digit pricing. The major ones, or what I call the most successful one so far, is the Commercial Agriculture Credit Scheme. And we also have the Real Sector Support Fund, which gives the opportunity for long-term lending. And that speaks mostly to those who are into processing, the need for you to do capex investment, to acquire equipment to scale up production, to expand operations. And the Anchor Borrower Program, which is shortened as ABP, that speaks to providing working capital, short-tenured funds to fund crop production, which the cycle ranges from 3 months thereabouts and upwards. And there are other lending institutions like the Bank of Industry, the Bank of Agriculture, the Nexim Bank, that provides financing windows for export commodities. And the NASAL as well, the Nigeria Incentive-Based Risk Sharing System for Agricultural Lending, that provides credit guarantee support to operators to institutions who lend to investors in the sector. And the level of guarantee range from 30% to 75%. And borrowers are also incentivized via the interest drawback program, where they get between 20 to 40% of the interest they have paid, provided they meet their obligations as and when due. NASAL applies that rate to incentivize borrowers, to encourage them to meet their obligations and also support growth in that sector as well. And talking about loans and businesses, I also thought it would be nice to mention how loans work for our business. I picked a few points in the previous presentation whereby it was mentioned that it's important to know what type of loan that you require for your business. You cannot use short-term funds to fund long-term projects. What does that mean? If you have short-term funds, like an overdraft, for instance, is used to meet day-to-day needs, short-term needs of a business. Now, where you have, and it's also used sometimes to purchase inputs for your business, and to move your business around, to go, to do things that have a short cycle, whereby you get back your cash very quickly and turn it around again. But in a situation where an investor takes an overdraft facility and goes to use it to buy trucks, what you have done in that situation is reduce the available working capital to that business, right? Because that long-term asset, or maybe a generator or something, will not generate cash for you in the short term. And by extension, you are limiting the available funds for that business to continue to operate. So loans help to bridge finance gaps or day-to-day operational needs. It helps to part finance. I want to buy, I want to increase my capacity. I'm a rice miller. I currently have a 30 metric ton per day mill, and I want to increase my capacity to 50 metric tons or 100 metric tons because I'm unable to meet demand. I have some cash, some equity available, but I can't afford the balance. You can take loans to part finance and achieve your objective. You can use it for short-term financing as well. I mean, Mr. Areshu Wushafe mentioned earlier, talked about the low season of buying grains, right? Processors, those who are already processors or animal feed producers, for instance, require, short-term financing to stock up grains at the time when the prices are low, such that they are able to remain competitive in terms of their pricing, over the medium term, and have stability and stable supply of raw material. So such funds work in that kind of situation where you get such short-term funds to stock up on your inputs, or you have a demand-led, maybe a Nestle, you are supplying grains, maize to them, and when you supply, they're paying you maybe 30 days from the day that you invoice, and you need to go back and do another set of supply. Short-term funds like this come into play at situations like that to enable you, to continue your operations pending when you get payments. For jobs or supplies you've done. And I've spoken about expansion, increasing capacity or setting up additional production sites or locations. So those are the kind of things that loans, you find them useful to do. And what's just a few tips. How do you know you need a loan? It depends on how well your business is doing. If you're unable to meet customer demand for your products, it's an indication that you need to begin to ask yourself, is there a need, is it a production inefficiency, or is an actual need to expand operations, right? Because it may be that there are constraints in your production process that you need to pay attention to and operate more efficiently to meet customer demands. But so once you're able to answer questions like this correctly, it now begins to reveal whether you actually do need external financing, for your business. And in going further, just some simple steps. Once you have determined that you actually do need a loan, right? And you have done your homework, you've done your paperwork. If it's an expansion, you've done your business plan, you're able to calculate how much you need, and you find out how much you can borrow, because your needs may actually, what you can borrow may actually be less than what your needs are. So in that kind of situation, you now begin to think, okay, how can I do this expansion? Can I implement this expansion in phases, right? Because as good as loans can be, if you don't take the right kind of loan, you can actually work against the business. So you find the right type of right loan type. You check what lenders are offering, and you find out the requirements, the eligibility requirements. What business plan you have in place? What are the cash flow projections? Have you done this thing before, or you're trying to experiment? Because the reality in the market and in life is that money actually follows value, right? If you've not done your homework properly, it's unlikely that you will get funding the way you want it, So that speaks to eligibility requirements. And you also compare your options, right? Then you get all your documents together, and you submit your application to the proposed financing institution for consideration. And in concluding, the first step to agribusiness, like has been widely highlighted, is to understand the sector of interest, and is actually not funding, seek and have understanding, possibly also look for a way to start. Some of those options have been highlighted earlier. I remember a few years ago, I had an opportunity to speak to a group of young graduates, youth corpers, who were into farming. It was I was invited to speak with them somewhere. And part of what came out of that session was that a lot of them, in fact, virtually all of them, they were producing, some crops. I can't remember what crops, right? And they wanted to expand. They got a location where they needed to lease land at, I think it was 20,000 naira per hectare for a year. And they were all complaining and saying, oh, they don't have funds, nobody is helping them, they don't need money. Then I looked around the room. Then I asked one question, that everybody here, do we all have, is there anybody in this room who has a smartphone? They should raise their hands up. Everybody raised up their hands. And I saw sophisticated smartphones in their hands. They were looking for 20,000 naira to lease 1 hectare of land for 1 year. They didn't have that cash, but the smartphones they were holding in their hands. So I told them that the phones you've just raised up, that is your 1 hectare of land or 2 hectares of land, right? That because before you will really find somebody who will fund you externally, you need to demonstrate and show what you have done, what you are doing. Then you now want to scale it up. So I picked that from the previous presentation, and I think it's very important. It's something that we all need to pay attention to, right? Because there's something called a learning curve that every entrepreneur will go through. That learning curve, you find a way to go through it by being creative, raise funds, and when you now get to the point where you're scaling up, you look for external funding. Agriculture is actually not a sector that you want to start fresh, and the first thing you're looking for is external funding. The first thing to do is to understand very well what you're going into, seek knowledge, achieve a level of competence at a small scale. Then you now begin to scale it up. Look for partnerships. I spoke about what I saw in Dawanu Market a few years ago about rice, right? It's only partnerships that can bring about that, and by the time one starts at a small level, now I'm not talking about a large commercial size level where one can pull investors together and set up proper structures that you now bring in expertise to manage, in that sense. I'm talking about a level where you are trying to grow a small business, So seek for partnerships, to complement each other's efforts, or to complement your efforts to get that understanding, in that business, and before you now get to a level where you are scaling up. So okay, I've spoken about all of this and the sector, and in addition to that, before going into agribusiness, consider your options, consider your areas of interest, and consider your states. You know, I mean, I've mentioned here that, I mean, a typical production life cycle goes from 3 months to upward of 50 years. By the time you're talking about oil palm production, for instance. So you can imagine if you have somebody who suddenly develops interest or hears that there's money to be made in oil palm, right? And maybe the person is 60 years old, he has just retired, and he goes to start to invest money in oil palm production at that time. Number one, the energy level is not available at that time and age. You cannot compare with somebody who is 30 years old. Then number two, you know, the first um, up to the first 5 to 6 years, yes, there are, there are varieties of oil palm now that begin to fruit in just under 5 years, right? But you don't attain optimal yield in oil palm up until about 10 years. So if a 60-year-old man hears that, oh, there's money to be made in oil palm, and he takes his savings to go and invest in that sector, at what point is he going to be able to begin to get the benefits that come out of that business? So that is part of what understanding, you know, the sector and understanding yourself, understanding your situation. That is part of what it brings. And it's also important to have that burning desire, you know, to succeed. That interest must be a genuine interest, not placing profit first, because that is what will see that business or the investor through any period, any down period where there are challenges, such that you just won't give up very easily, because money can be made and money can be easily lost where the required learning curve is not there. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions or comments now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oshin, for that
Thank you,
thought-provoking
sir.
and insightful presentation. I mean, if we've paid attention, we'll see that there is a lot of intersection between this presentation and the earlier one that we had. So just before I go to take questions, I'd like to mention that a number of questions that were asked the other time that we couldn't take in the past session have been answered. So if you go to the questions Q&A section, you'll see and click answered questions. All those questions have been answered there. For people that we didn't answer their question the other time. We have two questions here. So I'm going to read them out. And I will just want Mr. Oshin to help us answer them. Is there any organization saddled with a big data collection where we can access data for usage?
Okay. Yes, there are organizations that have data and reports. The one that's quickly came to my mind, there's an organization called Augusto and Co. The research company and rating agency. They have reports that cuts across various sectors. They have combination of reports that combine various commodities or sectors, and they have specific ones. You know, like if you say you want to go into maize, for instance, they have a bespoke report for maize that tells you everything about that sector, because agriculture is a very diverse sector, so you can't have one document. And in terms of other data as well, various institutions have data, but most of this data are actually for sale. You can equally go online to check. There are some, from time to time, you can get information free. You can go on the National Bureau of Statistics website where you can actually download reports. The GDP reports, you get what will show you what are the export data for any sector that you want. So there are organizations where you can get them.
Thank you very much, sir. And just to also mention that if you also go to the other, in addition to what Mr. Oshin has said in response to that question, if you go to the answered questions, you will see a listing of some other places you can get this data, because somebody also asked that in the last session. He has also done justice to that question. Thank you very much, sir. The next question is concerning agri-bees. Can we invest capital in established agro companies for a percentage return? If yes, in your wealth of experience, which company can you recommend?
That's, well, I would say yes, you can. From the point of view that a lot of us in this session, I'm sure a lot of us have, at some point or the other, you have bought shares in companies, right? So from that perspective, I'll say yes, you can invest, but you need to do proper due diligence, before to get that comfort to invest funds, because in most cases, once money goes out, if you give it out to the wrong person, it becomes an issue. So it still goes back to the fact that you need to do your research. You need to have a good understanding. Then to that question, that which company is actually like coming to ask me that, can I marry this person? So it will depend on the individual. It will depend on the circumstance. It will depend on whether the person you want to invest in the first place, do you even share the same values, right? It can be something as simple as, if I give money to this person, I mean, there are people who you give money to them, they see nothing wrong if they don't pay you back. There are people who don't see anything wrong in not keeping their word. So it all depends on, do you even, from the value point of view, do you even share the same values with this person in the first place, before you now go into the details of the business or the understanding of the business. But you also need to have some level of knowledge that will guide you in taking such decisions. So I hope I've been able to answer that question satisfactorily.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Mr. Facilitator, Mr. Facilitator, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Wole Oshin, for the excellent presentation. We have passed our time by over 30 minutes, and it's not a wasted time. However, I will like for us to use the Google form that our facilitator, Kari Alawande, is going to post very soon, as soon as the Vice President begins to wrap up, so that we can free people to go do some other businesses today. But like I said, if we are committed and we keep our eyes on the ball, we will do something extraordinary before the end of year 2020. So the ball is in our court, ladies and gentlemen. So I'll just give another 5 minutes for question and answers. And thereafter, I will request Mr. Facilitator to yield the microphone to Wole Adeni, who is the Vice President, so I can have a quick wrap up, and we'll close this meeting. However, without mincing words, I'm sure Babajide and Wole will be willing to come back to us in another month so that we can walk all of those details that people will want to talk about again. So you have the microphone now, my dear brother.